Hey guys, I'm Jake, that's Josh, and welcome to the CADClass podcast, the hardest title to say of any type of podcast. And today we're going to be talking about 3D printing in businesses. So when Josh and I first started off our business, we didn't start off doing CAD. We actually started off starting a very small 3D printing farm, producing some of our own products, and then starting to actually try and make money. Downside, it doesn't make all that much money at the very beginning because we did it completely the wrong way. So stick around and we're going to go into all the pitfalls and all of the anti-pitfalls of where to make money with 3D printing. So Josh Manley is here, my business partner, and we're going to get started into, well, how we went wrong and where you can actually start to avoid issues with business in 3D printing. Josh Manley, take it away.
Yeah, so it's awesome to be here. This is our second podcast live on YouTube. So thanks so much for stopping by. If you do have a comment, leave it in the comment section. We'll try to answer some of your comments along the way. We love interacting with the audience, so we want to make this as interactive and as interesting for you all as possible. So the founding story, I think we've told the founding story a fair bit, right? So we originally started the 3D printing business because we had a problem in our own shop that I had a dust collection adapter problem, is what I say that I had. Is I was working with kids. We were working with them on the table saw, and I couldn't find a dust collection adapter that fit. Every time I went online to buy one, I spent an hour or two, wasted a bunch of time trying to find an adapter. I don't know why adapters are like this, but they seem to be like that a lot.
They're the worst things in the world to buy.
We've heard it from a ton of people. Any other woodworkers or metal workers probably know what we're talking about. The dust collection exit port doesn't match the vacuum collector port size. And for some reason, nobody comes up with anything that ever fits the two.
Except for us.
Yeah. So we started
Except for us, but why?
What's that?
Why were we the only people that were like, that were going to Home Depot and measuring every single tool that we could find and then making all these adapters? It was such an easy 3D print, such an easy thing to sell.
That's the problem, isn't it? So we ended up designing a dust collection adapter, 3D printing a solution, and it solved the problem that I had had for 2 years. Jake had over many years as well, which is that finally the dust collection port would fit the vacuum collection port. And we made it. We put it up for sale on eBay, and we sold one that day. So it gave us the sense that we are awesome. We are geniuses.
We can make actual money.
Nobody has ever thought that they could make it like this in 3D printing. We must be the first ones.
Yes. This was after a $10 profit, I should add.
Yeah.
Tiny.
$20 dust collection adapter, $5 shipping, plus all the eBay fees, and we ended up making about $10 profit. But that said, we did end up selling over $1,000 worth of adapters and other little things on eBay. So it wasn't totally a failure. So what was the...
It wasn't a failure.
What would you... I think this is one of those things that's tricky for me because we didn't fail in the sense we did sell product, and we did sell enough product to pay for our initial investment in some of those 3D printers. And it actually did launch us into another business, which is interesting. But why would you say we failed that, Jake?
So I would say we failed not because of any physical matter. We chose Ender 3's 3D printers. They're about $180. They're the most popular 3D printer on the world. And we chose filament that is very, very common, that people have very good reviews for, that is very consistent, that we dialed in perfectly to all of these different companies. So we said, all right, well, Hatchbox is a very, very popular PLA material. Matter Hacker is a very popular filament company. It's actually a few miles away from me here in Southern California. And so if we just buy the same batch of material from these companies, then we can really dial in our settings. So regardless of what color we use, we'll basically be right on the money. So we will lower the amount of post-processing that we ever need to do. And because the human time is the most expensive factor, which we'll get into, if you can dial in your settings for your material, then that takes care of most of the issues. So we said, all right, cool. So we're not spending too much time on there. We didn't put too much money into the actual machines themselves. But I think the place where we didn't really excel is that we were thinking very, very small. going the eBay route is great just because it's a quick sell. eBay does all the work for you. It hosts all of your advertisement, I guess you can call it. But it's not taking the next step to then reach out to these companies and say, hey, we have this product that you aren't selling. How can we get this in stores? And with that comes a certain amount of litigation. It's an absurdly long time span to actually work with these companies. Josh actually reached out to Home Depot and Lowe's and said, hey, can we work with a certain deal? Can we get these cheaper if they're plastic injection molded versus 3D printed? Just how can we lower the cost and increase distribution? And we got very, very little feedback. We got a huge amount of thanks from people from eBay going, this is what I've been asking for. And we showed that to all these distributors. And they didn't give us any feedback whatsoever. They didn't even reach back out to us, which was really strange. So what we kind of figured is, well, this is such a niche product. Maybe it's just not worth their time. So we'll just have to be comfortable with the low profit that's coming in, or the low sale numbers that are coming in. But what we know from other people in our community that actually do make a living selling 3D printed parts is that, well, you just picked the wrong products. I think we went a little bit too niche. What do you think about that?
I don't know that we went too niche. So the first thing you said, I think that's kind of interesting, is you said we were not thinking big enough. I think I slightly disagree with that. I think we did imagine a world in which we could be the universal adapter builder. We did imagine a world in which we could collaborate with all these big brands. And one of the exercises that we did fairly early was to pencil out our path to $1 million. Do you remember when we did that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we tried to figure out, okay, we bought a $200 3D printer, Ender 3, the pretty standard 3D printer intro for a lot of people. And what would it look like to turn an Ender 3 farm into $1 million business financially? And so if I recall correctly, I need to go back and rerun these numbers. I'm not sure if these are actually accurate, but if they are, if I'm recalling this correctly, I want to say that 50 3D printers in a garage running 50% of the time, each of them making on average $2 an hour per printer. Keep in mind that each printer can have many parts on it. So each printer making $2 per hour, 50% of the time, 365 days a year, is $1 million a year business out of your garage. So that's a pretty enticing. I think that's a pretty enticing business proposition.
It is, and it seems very doable, and it really is. I've seen companies on Reddit where all they do is they sell cookie cutters, and they have thousands and thousands and thousands of different types of cookie cutters of every different shape you can possibly imagine, and that's all they sell. And they buy these huge metal racks that are really sturdy from Costco. They load them up. They can fit like 15 3D printers on a rack. They all plug into one outlet. How it goes, and they just have maybe 4 or 5 of these racks in their garage, and they're all going 24 hours a day. And they just have one worker, and he's just there with just a little putty knife, and he goes into a bag, shipping label, out. And he said he makes, I think something like $250,000 a year just out of his garage. And he says it's pretty easy. It pays for itself.
It is easy. I wonder on these businesses, because 3D printing is so easy to get into, and everybody who not everybody, but many people who buy printers end up thinking, how can I turn this printer into a business? I think that's a common next step. As soon as you gain some skills and you recognize that not everybody has them, then you start to look around for problems or other things that people have built that you can sell. And so you end up automatically kind of thinking about yourself as an entrepreneur, as somebody who can start a business, and then you go in and try to actually do it. Now, I think where people really run into issues is, like, for example, this guy that's selling these parts, he's probably got some distribution channels built up that are decent, but what's stopping other people from coming in and competing and cutting him out and undercutting his prices? It's because there are so many people who think they can do it. It's hard to build a moat around what you do.
I think the moat comes from having a history of sales. If you find an area that's niche, if you are the custom cookie cutter guy, then everybody that wants one goes to you because
I don't think so.
You're the guy.
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of competition.
Really?
You look at Etsy and eBay, like cookie cutter is a great example. If you look at the exploding competition, eventually people go, let's say you're selling $30 cookie cutters, and they're not
Mhm.
much different from a $10 or $15 cookie cutter. At some point, people do go that bargain route if they're trying to save cash. If they've built up a relationship with you, and now this is different, right? This is real business building. If you've got customers and long-term relationships and you've built them up over a long period of time and you continue to provide a ton of value to those customers, then I think you're great, right?
Mhm.
You can build a moat around your business. I just think with 3D printing, it's harder because you have to be even better at building those because there's even more competition and everybody thinks they can just pump stuff out and sell it to you, right?
Yeah. And
Who's
some
blue
people they
blooping? Are
can.
you blue
Some
blooping? Or is that me?
No,
That's
that's
funny.
you.
Is that
That's
me?
you on Discord.
Oh,
Yeah.
I got to cancel that. This is wow.
What I would say as far as the moat, which is a really good way to put it, I would say there is definitely a moat, and it's unfortunate that when people go online on Thingiverse, they print something out, they go, "Oh, this is great." If they're 3D printing, a little fidget spinner or just a little product, I think one of their immediate reactions they go, "Well, I printed it out perfectly. I can put it online and sell it." And we've both had that exact same thought so many
That's
times. And then we go on eBay, we go on Etsy, and we say 3D printed fidget spinner or whatever. Even something fairly niche that you think, I could be the first person to do this. And you look and there's a million people that are selling it already. And all those people already have thousands of sales, which is important because it means that this is also not only uh, a market that you don't need to get into, but there is a market. There's a substantial market. There's thousands of people that are buying this. So it's not that it's the mode of manufacturing that is the problem, because that would be a moat. Because well, anybody can get in there. It's the product. It's the fact that you just haven't found something niche or you haven't hopped on something. We've talked about this before in the past, not on a podcast, but going onto Thingiverse and finding something that you find interesting and then selling it is a pretty poor way to go about business. Um, I mean, first off, you're going to be running into a lot of Creative Commons issues because if you go onto any Thingiverse page, at the very, very bottom, there'll be a little C inside a little C, and you can click on it. You can actually see, all right, well, has the person that created this said that you can sell this? Have they said that you can sell it, but you have to donate a certain amount of money back to them, or you need to give them credit? There's a bunch of different lists of Creative Commons that kind of go into it. And what you'll find is that it's much easier and much more profitable to just circumvent that and make your own product from scratch. It is so much easier. Not only do you have the original file, not only do you have all the IP, but you're now the only person that can sell this.
definitely.
I've heard a lot not horror stories, but a lot of bad stories of people that they come up with a solution, they 3D print it, they sell a bunch, and then they post it on Thingiverse as a sign of goodwill. Chep on YouTube?
Yeah.
Yep, we love Chep. One of his very early wins is that he bought a 3D printer, one of his first Ender 3s, and then his mailbox lid broke, the little red tag. And so he couldn't find a replacement. And so he said, oh, this will take 2 seconds to model up in CAD. 3D printed it, he fit it, and it fit perfectly. And so he just put it on eBay. He said, oh, yeah, this is kind of slightly unique mailbox. I'm just going to sell it. And he sold a pretty good amount. He actually had to buy a pallet of red PLA, of red material, that I think he's still selling to this day. And it's sold like gangbusters. And he was like, oh, great. Now, well, 3D printing is such an open source community. It's such a friendly, giving things away for free because we're all part of this lovely, beautiful maker society. And some company just snagged it and then started to sell it. And it was like, oh no. So then he had Creative Commons built in. Said, hey, you can't sell this. 3D print this for yourself. That's fine, but you don't sell it. He then reported that person or the company to eBay, reported them to Etsy or whatever. And he said it took like 6 months for any action to happen. So, and in that time, they probably made thousands and thousands of dollars. So it doesn't even matter that that you finally got their store to be closed down. They've already made out like bandits, There is nothing that you can do essentially. So if you make something that you want to sell that you've actually made on CAD, please, please, please do not post it on Thingiverse or Printables. or GrabCAD or anything like that, keep
Yeah.
that file to yourself.
Protect your IP.
It goes, it goes against that maker instinct.
Definitely.
I absolutely have that mindset of no, put it out for free. Josh and I both have that mindset. We go, no, it's on the internet, it's education, or it's a product. It should be free. Put it out there. And there are some definite upsides to it, but there are some pretty brutal financial downsides.
Totally.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think when it comes to selling your own products, you nailed it. It's really tough. I think actually, though, the main issue I run into with 3D printing is that you just got into this, so you actually don't have a distribution network. And one of the issues I found in scaling our 3D printing company, or trying to think about scaling it, was who are we actually selling to and how do we find them?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily true that if you make actually, it's very not true that if you make a great product that fulfills a need, that it will just magically get out into the market. And that's going to be a common theme, I think, throughout this podcast, probably for a long period of time, is after you've gotten an idea and if you really validated it, and we can go deep into what it means to really validate an idea. That's a topic. I'm curious to know if you guys are interested in that, but you need to figure out how to get it into the hands of people, and then how to actually interact with those people in a way that allows you to sell the thing. And this is also true of our online course, by the way, which I'm going to quickly tease that one of the later segments of today and say we're going to talk about what happened when we first launched our online course. And I'm curious in the comment section if you have any guesses about what happened over the first couple of months of launching our first online course. So if you've got a guess, throw it in the comments, or even just say hello, because we'd like to know you're here. But the distribution problem is much harder. So knowing who specifically you're selling to, and then how to actually reach out to them on a very practical basis, is such a critical part of the business that is very difficult to solve. If you're selling a fidget toy, who are you selling it to? Like, very specifically, who are you selling it to? And how are you going to outcompete other people who are selling it to them? If you're selling even your own invention, Sam Coleman. Hey, Sam.
Hey, how's it going, man?
Saw your review come in for the book. That was awesome. You or Rebecca, I don't know. Actually, maybe it was Rebecca that wrote it. Nice to have you. Yeah, but knowing who your audience is, actually, Sam's got a great example, right? He sells, he refurbishes windshield wiper motors from old cars. I don't know what year exactly, so I'm not going to say it. You can say it, Sam. But he's got a very niche product with a findable group of people, because there are car clubs. Rebecca wrote it. There are car clubs. There are forums. There are meetups. There's a real community built around this idea. And I think he works on cars from 55 to 82. I think that's one of the central themes of what we're talking about here is, it doesn't matter if you've made a great product. It doesn't matter if you've made a unique product. It doesn't matter if you put it up for sale and took great photos and do all those things, if you don't know how to go out and then tell people, show people, and convince people that it's worth their money, it's worth parting with dollars for what you've done versus the other things that they've done. So I found the distribution side of it to be by far the hardest part.
Yeah, one of the early examples that we tried to do and then failed spectacularly. And Josh, you probably forgot about this. We tried to get into the moss pole industry.
Oh,
you remember that?
And nobody I didn't even know what a moss pole was. By the way, I still love the look of that product.
Yeah,
that
it's still
product is so slick. But
so for anyone that doesn't know, a moss pole is, as the name implies, a pole that you can wrap moss around. You can stick it into a plant pot, and any plants that have any growing vines, ivy, monsteras, any big plants that need some structure, that also like to grow on moss, really, really essential. So a lot of people that are into having tons and tons of plants all around their house, moss poles are a really big industry. We actually were really good friends with a guy who was selling so many of these 3D printed, basically tubes that you can pack full of moss and then screw together, 3D print them, and he was shipping. And he said that he was selling so many of them that he literally couldn't keep up. He said he couldn't 3D print fast enough. He didn't have enough outlets in his house to pack with 3D printers. He said he couldn't raise the prices enough that he felt comfortable with to actually go through all of the orders. It was insane. It's a great problem to have, but we heard that and we were going, that's fantastic. I've never heard of this. What an awesome niche little group. We should absolutely get into this. So he said, hey, we've got some 3D printers. Would you be interested if you gave us a file, we 3D printed it for you, and then we just ship them to you, and then you can distribute them, and we'll take just a little cut. And he said, nah, I like to have all the manufacturing at home base. Okay, fair enough. He said, would you mind if we, just with this information, if we designed our own and then 3D printed and then sold some of our own? And he said, yeah, absolutely. Why would I mind at all? And go, okay, that's pretty cool. And what we found out is that we made 3 different designs. They were all interlocking, different styles.
Space. We had a space theme one. We had a... What were the themes? The themes were really cool.
They were gold, silver, and copper. I don't even know.
The colors. We had themes, right? The one of them was a space theme. It had kind of dimples. It was like looked kind of like moonlandy,
like moon craters. Some of them were crisscross that goes through.
Yeah.
They were just complicated tubes that screwed together, and you could design them all different ways. And they were fantastic. They worked really well. They were really fun to 3D print.
You could screw them into the soil. They had these like really nice canonical screw,
like this auger with it. It was fantastic. What a fun product.
Yeah. How many did we sell?
And absolutely 0. We sold 0. We took really nice product photography shots. We said, okay, well, let's invest in some lighting. Let's invest in, getting a nice camera. Let's invest in getting some photography paper, and then some like clear acrylic stands so things look nice and presentable. And I'm going to learn a little bit about photo editing, and I'm going to get into and tweak all these different settings. And our product photography looked great. It was miles ahead of what we had previously, and it didn't make a damn bit of difference. It didn't make any difference whatsoever.
Didn't sell anything.
And so after a while of these things being up for months, we reached back out to our buddy and said, hey, what's your secret? And he goes, oh, well, have you guys gone to any plant conventions or any plant shows? No. He goes, why not? Well, that's where your customers are. And so now
distribution.
So then it came down to Josh and I. We said, okay, well, do we want to be in the moss pole industry so much?
Do we want to be plant people?
Yeah,
do we want to be plant people?
That we're going to go to?
And maybe that's the critical lesson. Is do you want to be the type of person that sells that thing? Is I think really interesting. Like I was happy to sell dust collection adapters because we were working with table saws every day. This is my world. I really enjoy woodworking. I am happy to be in the woodworking world. But the plant world, I can't even keep plants alive.
I don't care. And more importantly, people know that I don't care. So he was going to a convention literally every single week. That means he had a booth, he had business cards, he had stands, he had a video on a monitor that actually showed everything. He was talking to people, he was active in online communities. He built out a website that was really lovely. And he did all of this extra effort outside of just 3D printing and then making a selling page that was just far, far, far ahead of what we even thought. And it really...
So you mean you don't just put a product up there and it sells itself? Is that what I'm hearing?
And it really did come down to the fact that, well, the 3D printing aspect is actually the smallest part. The only reason that he chose 3D printing is because that he had a 3D printer. He was a hobbyist. And so it was the obvious thing.
I want to double click on that. I think that's really interesting. So the 3D printer is actually not so interesting in business, is it? I think this is where my mind keeps going. It's a tool that can solve some problems, but it's not something that solves all problems. So if you view your 3D printer as the thing that's going to make you money, you end up looking at solving problems through the lens of 3D printing. And I actually think that's the bigger issue. What you need to figure out as a business is how to solve the most important, the most critical problems for the most amount of people, and then to tell them and show them about it. That if what you're doing is looking at your printer and going, wow, what can I do with this? Then I think and I think Steve Jobs even said this. He said when they were thinking about designing the iPhone and the Apple and whatever you feel about Steve Jobs, right? We'll take what we can get from him. But he thought about the end user experience first. He thought about the person that was going to be using the thing first. He wasn't like, we have this amazing technology. Now let's go shove it down people's throats. Let's go make advertisements so that we convince everybody that they need this amazing technology. He wanted a great experience for somebody at the other end of his product, and he would work backwards through the customer experience into a product. So if you go and you're walking around, I have a 3D printer and I have all the solutions for all the things, and you think you can go out there and solve real problems, you're missing the point. The point is to solve the problem. The point is to get to the real fundamental needs of the people, and then to figure out how to distribute what it is that you do to the most people that actually need that solution. So to me, that's one of the biggest issues, is it's a shiny object and it gets all the attention and you want to talk about it all the time, but it's not actually the thing that's going to solve all the problems. What do you think about that?
It falls into that very classic saying of, when your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
There it is.
And we certainly talked about this when we first got 3D printed, when we were going, oh my gosh, it can solve problems. And it basically came down to, we were then looking at kind of common problems that we had, and we were really over-engineering the 3D printing solution to fit the problem, instead of just going, gosh, if I just made this thing out of metal, it would take me 20 minutes to make. It would be vastly cheaper. It would last much longer as a product. And we could just have a factory make it. And then it was like, okay, well then this is not a 3D printed solution. It's a metal or a wood solution. So but that was not as common as you think. Most, if you're good enough at designing your own parts, and if you're good enough at designing your own designing or knowing the tool well enough that you can design your product around the pitfalls and go towards the advantages of 3D printing, then it really can be a very, very large-scaled solution to a lot of problems. It's not as niche as hammer to nail.
But this leads us into, we go, okay, maybe 3D printing products is not viable for keeping two people employed, right? We have our own business. We're like, this maybe isn't viable to keep both of us afloat. Do you remember the next iteration, what we did after going, hey, well, we have this 3D printer and we know we're not going to sell our own products, or we're not going to sell a ton of them. Do you remember where exactly we moved after that?
No, I don't actually.
So we moved into making CAD models and 3D prints for other people. So the 3D printer became a bit of a sales tool, because people start to learn that you do that. Then they know that you know something about how to make things. And it's a bit of a salesy thing, because then they want to prototype their own products. So then we said, well, maybe we don't have to make our own products. Maybe we can just prototype products for other people. And that actually turned out to be quite a bit more lucrative. And specifically, the CAD side of things was more lucrative. And that's something we'll talk about in the third iteration. And I would argue we might even be on to the fourth iteration right now. But
I would say there's a step in between where we had friends who were selling parts and then came to us and said, hey, I don't really like my 3D printing guy right now.
Oh, yeah,
I'm going to go through you guys now. So we have a buddy who had a 3D printable product, but the person that he was buying from did SLA printing. So that's stereolithography. Basically, you have a big bath of resin and you've got a build plate that actually pulls a 3D object out of a bath of liquid, in the same way that you have nail polish that reacts to UV light and it hardens. This is the same thing. It builds up layer by layer by shining a UV light underneath a bath of resin, and then it basically does that layer after layer after layer thousands of times, and then it builds into a 3D object. The downside is that it's very labor intensive. You get a really, really beautiful quality part. It's often a little bit stronger than FDM or just a normal, what you think of a 3D printed part is, but the actual man time to actually produce it is vastly higher than an FDM part, because you need to set up ventilation, you need to clean the part with multiple rounds of isopropyl alcohol, you need to have cleaners, you need to have UV cures, you need to let this dry. It can be damaged easily. The parts get sticky. There's cleanup. There's rubber gloves everywhere. You have to clean down all these surfaces. There's multiple stations you have to go through. Resin can just be destroyed by accidentally leading it into. It absolutely has its advantages. If you want to be able to 3D print like figurines where it's very, very, very small and it has a ton of detail in it, SLA printing is your best friend. FDM is just not the way to go. But if you want to do en masse 3D printing with very, very little human intervention, then FDM printing is miles ahead of SLA. So our buddy was just getting parts through SLA where it's just basically just one color. There's not as many arrays of resins as far as filament colors that you can get. And so he was taking it and he was spray painting every individual one. And it was taking, God, I can only imagine dozens of
Horrific.
hours
He
per
had to spray
week.
paint it 2 or 3 times. He had to prime it and then turn it over and
Oh,
prime it again
God.
and then paint it and turn it over and paint it again. He was selling like a $2 clip and spending hour and a half.
Yeah, it was
It's
absurd. It was
crazy.
absurd. And then we said, like, well, I can just buy, exactly the color filament that you want, 3D print it, and give it to you. It's not going to be as perfect of a quality, but instead of it costing you far more time than you can sell it, I'll sell it to you for a dime, and I'll make 8 cents off of it.
So
And
then,
so it was a no-brainer.
yeah, so we moved from 3D printing our own stuff to 3D printing as a service. And in doing that service, we also started charging for some of our CAD time.
Mhm.
So we kind of ease into this 3D printing as a service and start charging for some of our CAD
Definitely.
time. And then we actually do get a couple of clients for product development. But
Mhm.
my take on the product development stuff is A, it was kind of fun, but B, it was very hard to do reproducibly because the types of products
Yes.
varied so widely that you end up competing with the big companies and the big firms. And so we're a smaller shop. It's like we don't really compete in that niche. We have to say no to most of these things. Again, I felt like
Mhm.
we had that distribution problem. So we moved from printing our own stuff
Yeah.
to printing as a service to printing in CAD as a service to R&D for other people, mainly focused on CAD. But then we kind of wind that down too, right? We
I
decide,
actually want to go back really quick,
hmm,
and to when we were a 3D printing service for someone else, and it's not that the distribution problem disappears. It just means you're putting your trust in another person. That's one of the downsides of it.
yes.
When the person who is selling your 3D printed product is killing it, is selling thousands of dollars per week, and you literally have to wake up in the middle of the night to go down and start new prints. And every single time you wake up, it's $300. I'm waking up, going down, and setting up for $300,
Which
and then
you
you go
did do,
back
by
to
the
bed.
way, which you
And
did do.
that makes waking up in the middle of the night way better, way better.
But it
And
also makes 3D printing a little annoying.
um, when
No?
the money's rolling in, I'll take a little bit of annoying
Pull
for
an
anything.
all-nighter.
That's fine.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
that's fine. And what it came down to is that when it's great, it's great. And when that person's distribution goes down a little bit, you're immediately affected.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
when you have all these projections where you go, okay, well, you know, just with these 3D printers going, we're making $1,000 a week, let's say, for example. You go, oh, this is great. While that's working, I can do other work, I can sell other parts of my business. It's like, oh my gosh, it's automatic. It does all the work
Yeah,
for me.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
to a
Which is
certain
another
extent, it
myth.
does.
Which is another myth,
Yeah,
right? Automatic. Everybody's in 3D printing knows it's not automatic. The
yeah.
nozzle clogs and the new beds and the bed leveling and the random firmware crashes. And it's like
Mhm.
it's not automatic.
It's more automatic than traditional manufacturing. I'll give
Yes.
you that,
Yep.
but it is not perfect,
Yeah.
and that's a big part of it.
Another
The
one of
other
the big
part,
myths is that
yeah,
it just works. It's anybody not in
uh-huh,
the industry or new-ish.
mhm,
And same with the Bamboo Lab. You have all these new fancy printers coming out, and people are like, "Oh, you
mhm,
just set them up and go." But I don't know if you saw the
yeah,
latest thing that happened like last night or 2 nights ago. Did you see this?
mhm, yeah,
Bamboo
yeah. Where
Lab just
people's
it's a
quality is now
cloud-based service,
destroying.
and they turn people's printers on in the middle of the night,
Yeah, instead of
just
printing it yourself.
randomly. So, and this is an anomaly. This is a crazy
Uh-huh.
situation, but at the same time, like I felt like I was looking at that, going, "Yeah, yeah, it's never perfect. There's always this weird stuff, and it's often weird stuff you can't predict."
Mhm, definitely. And
So,
it's I definitely agree. There is always some external force, and they're always, to a certain extent, this is applies to all business, unless you control every faction of every single, part of manufacturing and selling, there will always be a certain amount of trust in another person.
Yeah.
There's a reason that businesses in the past that, oh, I'm going to buy a mine to mine my own steel to then forge it to make a railroad part, to make railroad parts to then sell it, and I'm going to own every single part from manufacturing to distribution. Those companies fail for lots of really strange random reasons. Is because you always need to have multiple people in that chain to put your trust into. And so putting all your eggs in one basket, it's a terrible thing to do. I know it seems like it's the best thing in the world because you make all these projections. You go, oh my gosh, well, if I just buy another 3D printer, if I go from 5 3D printers to 10 3D printers, I can double my money. It's like, well, maybe not.
It's a double-edged sword, though, right? It's like as a business, you need to focus. You absolutely have to focus on the most important things that matter. And so there's this problem, which is you need to eventually diversify what you do. But in the beginning, you should probably focus mainly or exclusively on one or two things because you can't do anything else. That's all you can do. And so it's so hard to give this, like, I guess, as we wrap up this part of the segment where we go from 3D printing to kind of CAD as a service and that kind of stuff, what would we actually tell people starting out? What's the advice that we would give to somebody brand new, just bought a 3D printer, maybe learning some CAD, starting to make their own custom designs? How would we help them approach these problems in a way that's least likely to cause pain?
I would approach it by recognizing that the very first sales that you're going to do is going to be low quantity niche products. So when you first get into this, I would try and solve a problem within your own community. If you're part of a Reddit subreddit, it's,
what do you like to do?
This one.
What do you like to do? It's like, make a list of things that you actually genuinely enjoy.
First. I love woodworking. I love making woodworking jigs. Therefore, one of the first products that I did product development on, where I actually did lots of prototypes and testing, was a 3D printed woodworking jig, and I sold it, and it worked. It wasn't huge volumes, but it was incredibly satisfying to do. And it really does kind of get you the gears running where you go, okay, well, I need to take some product photography. I need to maybe pick up a camera. Oh, wait, the camera on my phone is actually phenomenal for this. All right, well, then I may as well make an Etsy page. Oh, Etsy allows you to put in videos. Well, great. Then I'll film a little demonstration. Okay, well, I need to pick up some lights. And so very quickly, you just start to build up all these small business skill sets and all this equipment that when you then progress from that original little product, it then skyrockets. And as soon as you find the next product that you want to sell, or you meet up with a distributor and they can actually encourage you to then sell more and more, it goes off like gangbusters, really.
So maybe this is it too. It's start with something you love, or I may add a small caveat to that, which is something you know a lot about.
Yes.
That you're intimately familiar with. You don't have to love everything. I think there is that myth in business that you have to do what you love. You have to follow your passion. I don't know about that. I think when you follow your passion, you end up having to deal with all of the issues surrounding it, trying to turn it into a business, and it becomes less passionate. When I thought about turning woodworking into a business, I got immediately less interested in woodworking.
Yeah.
Because everything around woodworking is, well, how do I make the sales? And now I have to deal with these people, and I like people.
And your hobby becomes work.
Your hobby becomes, what is it? Making that money. Your hobby becomes your jobby. And then you have issues because this is a job and you need to treat it like a job. And so you start to, a lot of times I think you end up losing your hobby if you turn specifically your hobby into your job. Now, that said, I think there are things around hobbies that still make really good businesses that don't tarnish the hobby. So if you are one great example is pickleball. Pickleball is huge right now. If I were wanting to come up with a product and I were into pickleball, I would be scanning that. I would be trying to figure out, what is everybody in this industry asking about, want, need? Is there a scorecard? I would basically dive in and ask as many questions as I could. And I would probably also brain dump all of the problems that I'd run into. And I would suggest spending the first 2 to 3 months thinking only about and talking only about the problems people actually have. And there's a great book for this, by the way, we both read, called The Mom Test, where if you want to know if your product's any good, don't ask people if your product is good, because everybody around you will tell you it's good. Everybody around it, right? So you need to get at ways about asking questions that don't put your ego on the line in such a way that other people recognize that your ego's on the line. If they recognize your ego's on the line, then they're out. They're like,
Yeah.
this is great. You're amazing. They'll
The
coddle you. They'll
worst thing
tell
you
you how
can say
wonderful it
is,
is.
"What would you pay for this?"
Right. So
The
instead of
worst
coming
thing
at
you can do.
people with a product, you come at them with questions about problems they actually have. Hey, when you play pickleball, what's the most annoying thing? Right? Where is, and then you work backwards through solutions to those problems, which, by the way, may or may not be 3D printing solutions, and that's fine. You're not after 3D printing solutions necessarily.
3D
What do you
printing
think
is
about
usually
that?
the very start of it. When it comes to modern manufacturing meets traditional manufacturing, in the past, it was literally, well, this part is obviously a plastic part, therefore it needs to be plastic injection molding. Guess what? If you want to make a prototype of that, that costs 10 grand, usually minimum. And then that may not work. Then you have to change it in some way.
Making molds is
Um,
expensive. Yeah.
yeah, I'll do a little tangent real quick. So one of my manufacturing professors used to be the head manufacturing engineer for Oakley sunglasses, and he said I was working there in the 90s, and 3D printing technically existed, but it was nowhere near as popular. It didn't exist on the hobbyist level or the consumer level. It was like, hey, one of these machines costs 100 grand, and only 10 companies in the world actually have a use for it. So it's like, yeah, it exists. That's about it. It's like when hobbyists talk about metal sintering 3D printing. It's like, yeah, it exists. I don't have access to it, but it exists. That's cool. And they were working on a new product, and the way it would work is that they would some sculptor would design a certain thing, then they would turn that into CAD, then they would start to carve it out of a big block of aluminum. It would cost about 10 grand. It would take about a month to actually make. Then they would injection with molten plastic, pull it out, and hand it to a CEO or something. And they would look at the glasses and they would go, I like it, but can we get this to have a little bit more taper and this section to be a little bit more curved? And just them saying, I like it, but you've just added 10 grand. You just flush that down the toilet. Now you need to start from scratch. You need to take this big block of aluminum and change it in some way. You need to throw that old one away, start out with another block of aluminum, carve it a little bit, injection mold it, hand it back to the same. And if you're lucky, they will go, perfect. It's great. Most of the time, they will go, oh, actually, no. I actually want way more taper. And can you put the logo slightly back at an angle? It's like, oh my God, I have to restart. And as soon as my professor then kind of learned about SLA, resin 3D printing, which is one of the first type of 3D printing, and they were now able to produce a prototype in 24 hours instead of a month, and it would cost them $10 at the time worth of material, and it was just a night and day. It was like, well, I'll get this to you tomorrow, and I'll see what you mean.
Definitely serves its
And
purpose.
so it revolutionized manufacturing. It saved manufacturers so much money and so much time. Oh, yes.
You know,
Yeah,
that you go through 10, 20,
prototype.
30, 40 iterations, 50. Sometimes if you're Dyson, 5,000, 10,000, right?
Yeah.
For the vacuum cleaner. So you go through so many iterations that it does actually save you tons of time on that. I don't think anybody's disagreeing with that. So I want to, if you don't mind, I want to get into a couple things that we mentioned that we would talk about on the pod in the thumbnail. So we said we talk, let's see, we talk about relativity space. So if you don't know what relativity space is a space company based here in California, 3D printing rocket bodies. Now, when I say 3D printing, what I really mean is that they're using lasers and robotic arms and welding heads to essentially weld their own proprietary material into a rocket body so that most of what goes into making this rocket body is 3D printed. They claim to be able to do it in 2 months, and they are actually dramatically driving costs down. Now, the only reason I want to bring this up, I think there's tons of things to talk about with this, but there's one thing that I think is extremely relevant to business that is interesting here. Do you know how they started?
I don't actually know.
So he was there's two co-founders that I have listened to. I don't know the exact origin story, but there's two co-founders that I listened to. Both were employees of, well, I think one was NASA, one was SpaceX, something like this. Don't quote me on exactly where they came from. But what was really interesting is that one of the founders decided, or that both the founders decided, that there was this possibility that 3D printing could revolutionize space. So they quit their jobs. They decided they needed to raise $500,000 to get this idea started and off the ground. And they did it by sending one cold email to Mark Cuban. They had heard through the grapevine that Mark was the type of guy that if he liked your idea, he would respond to your email personally. So he's known for responding to some emails, and there's a fair number of people that talk about this, right? So they sent one email to Mark Cuban saying, basically, we have this idea to 3D print these rocket bodies. Here's roughly what it looks like, yada, yada. We're looking to raise $500,000 to get started. Are you interested in putting 100,000 in? And Mark responded pretty quickly and was like, I'll do the whole round.
Wow.
500 grand.
That's pretty good.
Gave him 500 grand on the spot. And the reason I wanted to share this story is I think sometimes when you think about business, and now these guys had very real experience in the space industry. They had the credentials to back it up. It's not like anybody random could have gone in and said, hey, Mark, I'd like $500,000. You and I couldn't do that. We don't have space experience to do that, right? But I think sometimes in business, what people do is they overthink how quote unquote difficult it can be to get started, and they don't do something as simple as cold emailing. And by the way, another interesting tidbit here, they had to guess his email. They sent it out to 20 different iterations of what they thought his email was. So they guess his email, they send him a cold pitch, and they raise $500,000 to start and launch Relativity Space. And by the way, they've now launched their first rocket. It didn't fully succeed, although it did launch. They're talking about a second launch, and then they have a couple of different rockets, one with a much larger payload than the other, and they are actually jamming. And that is the largest metal 3D printer, at least in the States, and I believe in the world still to this day.
I think so. Yeah, Veritasium did a video on that.
Yes, he did. 2 years ago, he was there.
It is. Oh my lord,
it's amazing. Check out the Veritasium video. It is really cool, really, really cool. And I was the founder's name is Tim. I'm blanking on his last name, but he's got a lot of stuff on YouTube as well, and he's just fascinating to listen to and how he frames stuff. So I just thought that was an amazing, 3D printing story, and but also something that you can take with you in business. Is it's not always, it's not always the huge stuff. We said a couple more things in there, didn't we? What happens after launching an online course, Jake?
After you launch an online course and you produce dozens of hours of content, and you perfect which takes about a year to produce,
1,000, 2,000 hours. Okay,
yeah, minimum,
maybe more.
Absolutely nothing happens. Absolutely nothing. Because as soon as you do that, you realize, oh wait, nobody knows who we are. Nobody has any trust in us whatsoever. We're just random faces on the internet, a little bit as we still are. We're a little bit less just some dudes on the internet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is really, really strange.
So we had to, basically we launched, and the classic mistake, right? We launch to nobody. All right, our course is live, friends and family, that's about it, right? And our friends and family aren't really our market anyway. Like very few friends and family of ours actually are in this industry. So it's like, great, nice, we get all those congratulations, right?
Yeah.
We get all these nice kudos from people, but it didn't lead to any sales. We didn't get any sales. I think it was actually like 6 months after we launched. And by the way, we launched.
That's about right.
We launched sort of quietly, and then from there we moved to Reddit, and we said, hey, Reddit. And I think Sam, if you're still here, Sam was one of our early Reddit users who we go, well, actually, maybe we should get some feedback about this course first. So we'll kind of solve two problems at once here. A, we'll get some feedback about whether or not this is any good, because if it's not any good, then we probably shouldn't sell it. And B, we'll have real humans going through this course, so we can start to learn, interact, distribute. If they like it, maybe they'll tell their friends, maybe they'll become the kind of brand evangelists that we actually have. So then we moved on to, okay, well, what if we post it on Reddit? What if we went on to podcasts? What if we started talking? What if we advertised? We advertised on YouTube. We advertised on Google Ads. What else did we do to try to get this off the ground?
It was kind of trial by fire. We were kind of realizing that there was so many different avenues of content that we could produce, and so many different people that we go to, that it very, very quickly turns into a bit of a cloud, a bit of an ethereal market.
We did a lot. We have lists
which is
and lists and lists of
which is
things
an
that we tried.
awful thing to have.
It's
Where it's like, how many? As soon as you say, "Oh, well, anybody could use this skill set. Anybody could buy our course and get value out of it." That's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to get into,
but
because then
who
it means that
owns
nobody is going to buy it.
Yeah, everybody is nobody. That's right.
Yeah.
Everybody's
Yeah.
nobody. Yeah, so that was despite all of this, it's like build your audience before you need it, I think, is one thing I would
Mhm.
tell people. And you can start building an audience now. This podcast is one of our attempts to start to build some audience around what we're doing, and hopefully provide some value to you all as you join us. So build that audience now, and think a heck of a lot about distribution before launching. Talk to a lot of people, know whether or not you're going directly to other businesses, if you're going to schools, if you're going to individuals. If they're individuals, get very granular about the type of individual that's likely to buy the service. It's only once we started doing that, I think, that we had real success in selling this class.
Yeah.
And then we also did something else, right? So we wrote a book, and we published the book that is the same content as the course, but obviously doesn't have the live Zoom component. It doesn't have some of the nicer touches that we offer the online course, but that was also meant to drive traffic to the course. So we did a ton of heavy lifting. It is not so simple that you can just film a course and edit it and put it out into the world, and magically, as the YouTube folks would have you believe, it's going to sell. It's actually the opposite. It's not going to sell, and you're going to need to put a great deal of work into finding the right audience. That's assuming it's a good course and assuming that it solves a real problem, which I do believe we have both of those.
I would say so. I want to go back into the 3D printing aspect of it as well.
Yep.
Just because that's what I think most people find interesting, as far as let's say I just got my first 3D printer. I'm still learning. I've made a couple of my own designs in Tinkercad or Fusion, just kind of bulldozing into learning this program. And I've decided to 3D print my first thing, my first object that actually does work, is successful, looks good. And they go, perfect. How do I make my first dollar? I want you to walk me through exactly what they should do and where they should be, or the pitfalls that they should be avoiding.
You bought a 3D printer, you know how to design. You know how to design, or you don't know how to design?
Let's say they know how to design, yeah. Very basically.
Man, that's a tough question. I think it depends a great deal on who you are and what your skill set is. So there's a handful of ways I could think to make money with 3D printing that would be useful, especially if it's popular in your area. One, I would say a 3D printing technician is an interesting place to start. So by helping people troubleshoot their 3D printers, I think there's a real need for that. A lot of people end up just putting their 3D printer to the side, and sometimes these are $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 machines, and they're running businesses, right? And so a lot of people end up just putting them to the side. I think if you can help people troubleshoot those printers, that's really interesting. That's a neat way to go about it. I think
we actually started doing a little bit of outreach as far as finding clients, by saying that, hey, if you have a 3D printer that you need help getting started with, we're the guys that can help. We can come over for an hourly fee. We can figure out exactly, what you're trying to do, and then fix your printer or show you how to get started. And it was a very, very sneaky way to find out, well, the people that are likely going to be paying a substantial hourly rate to actually have someone come over and show them how to 3D print is not because they're a hobbyist. It's because they're probably trying to start a business. They're trying to start a prototype. So we've actually built out quite a lot of business relationships with people who are trying to get into the making a product and selling it. And they know that 3D printing is the start, but they aren't passionate enough about the 3D printing side to actually dive deep into it, enter you. And this is where, if you have a CAD background, a substantial CAD background, you can also say, hey, not only can I come and show you how to use your 3D printer, but hell, I'll actually do all the CAD work for you.
Yeah, and that's actually a really important point. Is I think doing things for free in the beginning is a big deal. I don't think you should do things for free for very long. But when you're
No.
trying to establish whether or not your service has real merit, if you can do things
Or
for free in
credibility.
exchange for a review or in exchange for a referral to somebody else who might also need your services, and you're explicit and upfront, like, look, I'm going to do this for free this time, but this is my business I'm trying to build. You can leave me a review on my little website over there. You can, I think that is a fantastic way to start to build credibility. And you will know when you're working with these clients if you're solving real problems, because it will become apparent to you that you are. And you can then use that as an into either updating your website or meeting new clients or interacting with other people. And also it establishes you as an expert, a domain expert, either in your area or in your niche or wherever it happens to be. So I think getting your hands on stuff and then doing real client work for people that need it, who can or cannot pay. If you can find paying clients and you're confident enough with your skill set right from the start to just go ahead and take that on, by all means, go for it. But be careful, because you might not actually have the skill set to pull it off yet. So probably an easier way to go about it is do things for free, but do it for very specific reasons to build your audience over a period of time.
A really good way to think about it is people that are getting into photography as far as making it into their business. And the very first things that they will do is they'll go, hey, I can take lots of really fantastic photographs. Therefore, I'm going to reach out to people who are having weddings or having birthday parties or corporate events. And they will try and advertise themselves. Yeah, I can do it cheaper than anybody else. And what they realize,
bargain
basement. Yeah. They go, oh gosh, I'm actually not as advanced as I thought I was. And I feel a little bit bad charging so much. And there is some truth to that. But trust me, there is someone even less skill set than you charging vastly more out there, guaranteed. And so if you are starting at the very beginning, 3D printing parts for people or doing CAD as a gig, then definitely build out a certain fan base, a corporate fan base, where people say, hey, I can actually vouch for this person. You can use it as a way to reach other clients. You can use it as a way to build out a portfolio. So there's lots of different ways to do it. But as Josh said, absolutely do not do it for free for very long. It's not
you have to transition. Obviously. You have to transition for free, but you also have to, I think you just have to know if what you're doing has value. And I like the analogy here of cooking. Anybody who likes to cook or has ever cooked something for somebody, you absolutely never ask people if they like your food.
Yeah.
It's much more nuanced than that. You have to watch the way they eat. Are people closing their eyes and really taking it in? When they eat it, do they make the ums and ahs? It's like, it's very obvious when people love what you do versus when they just like it, but only if you start to train yourself to see what it is. And I think that's also true of real needs. When you've touched upon something that solves a real critical need and you've agreed to do that for that person for free for whatever, and it really solves a need, they will rave about it. They will tell you how amazing it was. It will become obvious. But if you go in there begging for the attention of, well, how was it? Did you like it? Can you refer my services? You're kind of missing the point. So it's like you got to nail that ability to suss out when what you've done really solves a problem or is super enjoyable, or the food that you've cooked is the most delicious food they've ever had, versus it's nice and I just don't want to hurt your feelings. And I think that's critical in the early stage of business, no matter what you choose to do.
Yeah.
So we got about a minute left, Jake. How do we want to wrap this up?
I don't know. I think that's a great place to wrap it up.
I think it's a great place to wrap it up too. So if you're in the chat, or if you're still in the YouTube stream, thanks so much for joining us. I am Josh from CADClass.org.
I'm Jake from CADClass.org as well.
We've got a book. You can check us out, Mastering Fusion 360, if you don't already know. We've also got a course at CADClass.org with some free lessons in there if you want to drop by and have a look. And if you're just here to hang out, thanks once again.
Thank you very much, guys.
Cheers.
Well, I'll see you guys next week. Adios.
See you next week. Next week, same time.